Hi, hello, hey, and welcome to my tent, a place to hear life experiences, different opinions, a range of journeys, and a viewpoint different than our own. A place to challenge our own thoughts, a space to learn a little bit, and I promise some fun along the way. I believe we're better when we let a range of people into our tents, so welcome to mine. Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Welcome to My Tent podcast. I am happy you're here. We have a solo episode today, which I'm really excited about. And in these solos, I tend to talk about things that I have been thinking about, working through, life musings, all of the things. But today I want to talk about breakups. And you're probably thinking the first thought in your mind, this is not a relationship breakup or a friend breakup. I am talking about breaking up with yourself, with versions of yourself, because it's something I've really thought about in particular in the past few years as things in my life have really shifted. But I really kind of got into a big journal session on this last week, which spurred this interest in maybe talking about it on here. And maybe resonating with some people that might be listening, that might be struggling in some of the same ways that I do. I'm a big believer that we are supposed to change as people. I mean, if you think about it in a more drastic sense, obviously who I was at 6 years old is not the same as I am now at almost 35. And that is normal. But what I've realized, and through this journal session and talking to my therapist and all these things, and even some friends about this, that subconsciously at some point in life, I decided that change was less acceptable. And I kind of got in this whole spiral of trying to figure out when and why, and some of the things that came up for me as to maybe what was making me resist these things or avoid these things or put them off for longer than they should be put off for. And I think I came to realize that at some point, I classified myself as an adult. I can't really pinpoint an exact date, but I started realizing that the way that I thought of myself in adolescence was excited for change. And then at some point, I kind of got this idea in my head that I'm now unpacking and unwiring, in particular in the past couple of years I have been, that I wasn't allowed to change, that I was an adult. I should have everything together. I should have myself figured out, and letting go of versions of myself that weren't serving me became a lot harder. When I was young, I think it excited me to change. Oh, you turn 10, it's double digits. Yay. You turn 16, you get your driver's license. Hip, hip. That's great. You go to college, you're post-grad, you're figuring things out for yourself. You're getting older, you're changing. And I think there's a lot of this can be said about the aging process in general. And my birthday's coming up in a few weeks, so we're going to talk about that then on my thoughts on getting older. But I think maybe at some point I was like, ugh, getting older isn't fun. It used to be fun. I'm like, oh my God, all these fun things used to happen when you're meeting these like cool new age milestones. And then at some point I was like, Sarah, you're an adult. You are who you are. Stand firm in that. And part of me can be a little, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh my God, mom brain. Stubborn. There it is. Sarah. Part of me can be really, really stubborn. And I think this contributes to the breaking up with pieces of myself that have been challenging in the past couple of years, because I kind of dug my heels in on like, well, this is kind of who I said I was. And I'm really sticking to it. I have to be bold in my endeavors. But what I'm realizing is that that's not true. And it's okay to consistently kind of break up with pieces of yourself that maybe don't serve you anymore. And in particular, I will say the past 2 years of my life has been really pivotal. I'm talking probably the craziest amount of change that I've had ever, even with some of those crazy big milestones you have when you are younger. But in the past 2 years, I became a mother. Ronan's almost 2. He'll be 2 in like 10 days, which is crazy. So I became a mother, and I also left the corporate world, which I had been in for my entire working profession, and started my own business. And we also moved across the country. Like, so much has changed in the past 2 years for me in particular, that this has been more of an emphasis for me to work on, is being okay with letting go of pieces of me that once did feel good or aligned and no longer. Because it can be a confusing process. This is why I think I struggle with it, is it is confusing. Why did it work at one point and not in another? Yes, of course, sometimes there's massive life catalysts like having a baby or moving across the country. But sometimes it can be really subtle and it can be like, that seemed like good last week. Why doesn't it seem good now? And that's what I've really worked on is trying to figure out the pieces of me and the versions of me that I want to show up as right now, always going back to making sure they make me feel deeply personally aligned and being okay if at some point in the future that version needs to be changed. So let's talk about being a mother, because this was a massive thing that spurred a lot of change in me. And I don't want this to freak people out that are maybe thinking about becoming parents, saying, oh my gosh, one day your entire life, your existence, your identity just changes. I would be lying if I said that I am exactly the same person as who I was prior, because that's not true. And I do have a lot of episodes and whatnot about how I view parenting and working parenting and my identity piece of becoming a parent. But it was something that rocked me absolutely to my core and did change me in many ways, where versions of myself that I had pre-baby were just not it post-baby. And that's okay. Thinking about how much of my energy and dedication and focus is now on my son, rightly so, has really changed how I view relationships and boundaries and situations, and how much I now have to forward think, obviously about his needs, but about a lot of different things. And I think part of what I struggled with when I became a mother is letting go of the yes girl I used to be, and what I perceived in my brain as the fun girl, the girl that never missed out on a good time, the girl that always said yes, the girl that was always out, who got really bad FOMO if she said no, was always the last one at the party, was always down to do things like a little bit crazy, like for no reason, drive 15 hours from my college town to my friend's college in Massachusetts, to jump on a plane for no reason and 24 hours notice, like all of these things, right? And I was so set on being that girl, and that was kind of who I was. And people would, if I was like, what would you say Sarah is? And they would be like, she's a party girl, she's fun. And then of course, as I got older, and a lot of this started actually happening when we did IVF, but then pregnancy, obviously. But once I had my son, my entire life changed in terms of time and like what I valued and what I wanted to do. I didn't want to do any of that stuff anymore because I wanted to be there for my son. I don't want to stay up until 4 a.m., although I was in the newborn days, but that was not because I was out. That was because I had a baby. But there's much more to my life now that dictates my time and energy. And what I was not surprised by, but was a little bit difficult, was not everyone wanted to come along for that ride. And this is something I want to talk about in terms of breaking up with versions of yourself, because a big sticking point for me and where I really struggled is I'm a people pleaser. And I worked on that a lot too. It's gotten a lot better, but at my core, I don't like people to dislike me. I want to make sure everyone is happy and fulfilled. And I want to make sure everyone's needs are met. And I want to be seen as kind and fun and loving, which isn't a bad thing necessarily, but at the rate that I was doing it, it wasn't great. I was burning myself out essentially, but I am a people pleaser at my core. And I think when I break up with versions of myself, I'm almost hesitant because I know that not everyone is going to want to meet the new version of me. So this one was a big one for me. And some of it is dictated by like physical things that happen. So obviously there's a baby in my hands, a lot's going to change. But some of it is not so easy to see. It's not so tangible. So it's not an event or something. You know, when I moved across the country, by nature, I'm not physically as close to people, so I can't show up to as many things or be around as many people, or, you know, I have to fly places now as opposed to maybe just driving or hopping on a train, whatever. And so this is a version of me that's going to be different. So there's some things that are tangible, but there's also things that are not. And I would kind of consider this me quitting my job because, like, yes, there was a tangible job that was quit and one that was created, but I think the amount of space I have mentally to give things these days is a lot less. And so this new version of me is having to dedicate a lot of my mental capacity to my job and to making sure that I'm taking care of myself enough to then also show up for this new version of myself. I still consider it kind of new 2 years later, but the energy to show up for my son and for my husband and for the people that I love. And so all of a sudden it kind of feels like my physical and mental energy is just completely shifted in the past couple months. And I want to talk about physical and mental energy just for a quick second. And if you follow me on Instagram, you've kind of heard me go on this rant before. But it really holds true here in terms of like breaking up with past versions of yourself and becoming new versions of yourself. Because we have to take both into account. When you are physically tired, maybe you're sick, or maybe, if you run 10 miles, you're physically tired. If you're ill, your body is physically responding in some way. And that's a little bit easier to grasp, right? Same thing like having a baby, moving across the country, tangible things that are life events, right? They're easier to say like cause and effect. The mental energy that goes into who we are is often unseen. And this is where I found a lot of friction and confusion with letting go of pieces of me, because it didn't always necessarily click right away or make sense as to why maybe a version of myself was no longer feeling good. And I would kind of push past it and say like, oh, it's just a weird day or a weird week or a phase, keep going, blah, blah, blah. But what it ultimately came down to was these mental energy drainers or energy increasers, and we'll talk about that in a second, and what that was doing to how I show up in this world. And I came to realize that there was a lot of situations or things, people, activities that were really wearing on me mentally, and trying to keep up with who I was as a person and that version of myself that I maybe was that once felt so aligned was amplifying it. And so me trying to still say yes to everything and please people, even subconsciously, like realizing that my first instinct was to say yes or do something for someone else or like jump in or show up or try to be somewhere, or remember everything. And there's a whole gamut of things that went on, but so much of this was draining my mental energy because I was trying to keep up with who I once was. And so it came to this point where I said, Sarah, it's okay to let her go. Her being me, that version of me, let her go. It's okay to break up with her. And it's okay if those people that were maybe once in that circle don't come along for that ride. It's okay. I'm a big believer now. I mean, this is kind of all part of the work I've been doing on this. I am a big believer that people come into our lives for a certain reason, but not every single person that enters our life is supposed to be there long term. I'm very fortunate and blessed that I do have some very close friends and loved ones that have wanted to meet the new versions of myself that I have come out with over the years. And some of these people really have known me through a lot of them. But I think what I really struggle with when I do decide it's time to break up with the version of myself is knowing that people that I love or things that I love won't be there anymore. And it can be people or things. It can be, think of it, a example is like my husband and I used to love concerts, and we would go to concerts 2-3 times a week, go to festivals. And it's just that version of ourselves is not who we are anymore. And like, I know that we loved those things. I know that they were amazing and that they were fun and we had a great time. But when we break up with that version of ourselves, that's not going to come with us. It's not going to come. It can be the same thing for people, or it can be the same thing for situations or jobs or activities. I used to distance run. I mean, there was a whole thing around that, but I used to be this like crazy distance runner. And I decided to break up with that version of myself for many reasons to align better to who I am now. But I think that was one of the more challenging things for me is when I do decide to break up with a version of myself and say hello to someone new, some of the things and the people and the places and the activities that once lived in that universe aren't going to be in this new one. And that's okay. I think of it almost as these like universes. And when you're in a phase of life and you are embodying who you are, there is a universe that lives around you. And there's people that come into that. And there's things and there's items and there's stuff that lives in that universe. And as you move to a new version of yourself and you open up a new universe for yourself to enter into, there are other things and people that will walk through the door and they're like, okay, I'll check this one out too. That's great. Let's go in here. And there's people that are like, nah, I'm good. I'm going to stay here. Toodaloo. If you ever decide to come back, like maybe I'll be here, but like, I'm good. And what I also have to realize is as I am changing and I am letting go of things physically and mentally and emotionally and becoming a version of myself that I'm aligned to, it's okay to be sad about it, but it's also okay to feel greatly empowered by it. And I don't even really think when we leave those things, it's because we dislike them. It's not even a like or dislike thing. Obviously, there's like times where you're like, that person punched me in the face. Like I'm obviously going to not talk to them again, but I don't even think it's like a like dislike thing. And that's part of the other reason I really struggle with saying like, Sarah, you can let this piece of you go because I worry that people won't like me. It's a people pleasing thing, but I also really don't like being disliked. I don't know if anyone does, but I think that's kind of what prevents me sometimes of being like, well, I was this person for so long and I know people like it. I think that's also that there's comfort in it. I know that people like this version of me because it's proven. They're here. They like it, but they may not if I decide to not be this person, or they may decide they don't want to hang out with me, or they may think that I'm crazy. There are people maybe that will think that I'm nuts. But it's a fear of the unknown too. And I think that's a big piece of this as we step into the people that we want to be. We have to have that empowerment and that sense of self to know, like, first off, it's okay if not everyone's there, but also like, it's okay if you're a little scared of the unknown, because I don't exactly know what the future holds. I don't really know what's going to happen. But when I operated in one way for a certain amount of time, the outcomes felt a little bit more predictable. And I don't love not having predictable things. It's another thing about me. I feel like I'm very, all of this like type A rigidness, like I am someone that really enjoys systems and processes and like checking things off a list and predictable outcomes and like cause and effect. Like I love these things. And it bodes me well in very many areas. But, sometimes it's like, girl, you're too rigid here. You got to chill. So yes, that's, kind of a long-winded way of saying like, this is just what I've been thinking of recently and like who I am now. I've had to go through almost like the death of previous versions of me. And along with that, like the death of some stuff that didn't come with me. And I can look back on her fondly, but I can also know that where I am now is where I'm meant to be. And I think so much of me too wants to not be wrong, if that makes sense. I think I struggle with people thinking, oh, she was really wrong about that. As if, I decide to embrace a new version of myself. Someone's going to be like, well, you said that you liked this or did this, or this is who you were. So you were wrong, clearly. And no one's going to say that. They might, but like, usually I don't think anyone's going to come up to me and be like, well, you used to go out until 4 a.m. and now you don't. You were wrong. No, I think it's just the natural evolution of life, of embodying and embracing spaces that we are now meant to be in. But I think that's kind of what I struggle with too, is I don't want to be seen as like, well, why did she say she was one way, but she's not anymore? And this is actually what I really struggle with within my business and in my coaching practice is I would say, and people, if you're listening that do know me very well, love to hear your thoughts. I should actually probably ask people this question, but I would really say that I am very different than I was not even that long ago. My core values, obviously, like who I am intrinsically, inherently as a person is not that different, but how I show up in the world's pretty different now. And I'm proud of that. But what I kind of fear is sometimes people won't take me seriously because of that. Or if you maybe knew me a couple of years ago, or you knew me in college or high school, people would be like, "You're what? You're a health coach? Excuse me?" Because I would not say that version of myself would have ever been a health coach that in that phase of life. Like, I think it's a pretty kind of crazy 180. But I think that makes me who I am, and it actually makes me a good coach because I've been in other places and I know what it feels like to be where I am now. But I think that's kind of always a fear in the back of my head of like, if I ran into someone, you're probably like, you're way overthinking this. And you're like, this is what you think about. Yes. This is what it's like to live in my freaking brain. Is like, I'm convinced I'm going to see someone from high school on the street or college and be like, oh, I'm a health coach. And they're going to be like, who hires you? What? Because they knew me in that phase of life and they knew that version of me and they're no longer in my universe, not for a bad way. They didn't do anything wrong. You know what I mean? But like, people have left that universe of mine because I'm not in that universe anymore. Anyway, I feel like I'm getting on like such a crazy tangent right now. But I've just really been thinking about this. And I think my ultimate message to you is I hope that we all have the courage to let go of pieces of ourselves and let go of them with confidence, because we deserve to feel like we live with purpose, and we deserve to feel like we're deeply aligned to what we love, who we love, and the things that let us go forth with authenticity. And I think I lived in a world for a long time where I held on to so many versions of myself I didn't need to hold on to anymore because I wasn't really ready to let them go out of fear of judgment, out of fear of losing people, out of fear of losing things. But what I've realized is I've actually become so much more of myself every single time I shed a layer, and I get a little bit closer to who I am deeply in my core. And that's the end part of this. And that's kind of how I think of this now as a visual person, is every time that I shed a layer of myself or a version of myself that I've let go, that I've broken up with, I'm getting one step closer to the absolute like shiniest depths of my soul. And just because I am a quote unquote adult, it doesn't mean that I can't keep changing and keep learning and keep presenting new versions of myself along the way. That's that. Okay. That was like 22 minutes of me talking about this. I just went for it. I hope you enjoyed. I would love to know if you have any similar thoughts and opinions on the matter. I'm going to keep this one kind of shorter and sweeter now that we're back on the air. Now that we're back on the air, I'm going to keep this one kind of shorter and sweeter. There are some guests coming up in the next few weeks I'm very excited about. I'll have some more solo episodes on my musings, on life, on things that I journal about, think about. Although I am proud of myself because I really am proud of myself because I feel like part of this new version of myself, right? Part of the Sarah that I've let go is saying every single thought that's on my mind at all times in the moment. And I think that version of myself made me fun and kind of kooky and zany and like, oh, there's Sarah. She's a firecracker. And now that I give a little bit more thought and presence to my feelings and my emotions, like I've sat with this for about a month, you know, I've really thought through it. I feel like this version of myself gives things a little bit more contemplation, which gets me in less trouble on the internet, to be honest. Anyway, I gotta go. I love you. I hope you have a great rest of your week. I'm heading to Charleston this weekend. Oh my God. As I just like talked about the fact that I'm not a party girl. I'm heading to Charleston this weekend for a bachelorette party. But it was funny. I was talking to one of my peers, my coworker, Tara. She's whatever. We'll get into that later. And I was like, I do not do bachelorette parties anymore, but we'll see how it goes. See, this is like a funny, actually very timely, because I'm like, oh, I go to sleep at 8 p.m. and I don't go out, and I mostly don't, but I'm going to go to this bachelorette party in Charleston. It's going to be so fun. And I probably still will somehow go to bed at 9 o'clock because I'm tired. All right. I love you so much. Bye. Thank you for tuning in to the Welcome to My 10 podcast. I hope you had as much fun listening as I do recording. I am so happy to have you here, and see you next episode.